You ready?
I think so.
To be human is to communicate. I mean, that's the foundation of everything. But our voices do say a lot about us and influence the perceptions of our listeners. And you have to really trust that your voice is worth it, that you have something to say.
My voice is out there, and the answers I give, as you know, are incredibly predictable as well. What would you like for lunch?
Fish and chips.
Welcome to the Being Human podcast with Amelia Vegting and Jez Francis. Brought to you by Just Add Water.
Hello, I'm Jez Francis.
And I'm Amelia Vegting, and welcome back to the Being Human podcast, where with special guests we continue to explore what it means to be human in this world we find ourselves living in.
Season 3, Episode 8, Amelia. We've been doing this for a while now, haven't we? I've got a question for you.
Ooh, go on.
So when we do the edit process afterwards, when our wonderful producer, Chris, cuts out all my hesitations and repetitions and mistakes, of which there are many, we have to listen to our own voices back, don't we? So have you got used to that yet?
Well, I will admit that every time we do that process, I am listening going, oh my God, is that actually what I really sound like? And hopefully listeners don't mind it too much. But it's really weird hearing your own voice back, I think. It sounds so different to the way that you hear it when you speak out loud. And when we first started the podcast, 3 years ago, I found it a really painful, difficult process. But I have to say, I'm a little bit more comfortable now.
Me too. Although I still prefer how I sound in my head to how I sound when listening back. And I'm sure that's the same for most, if not all of us. I wonder why that is. Maybe it's just familiarity. You get used to hearing how you sound in your head, don't you?
Yeah, and I think being on this podcast has definitely made me think about the way that I speak and maybe potentially overanalyzing what I say. But it has made me think about how much of our identity is held within the way that we speak and our voice. It represents where you're from, where you grew up, what communities you're a part of. And, question for you, Jez, other than when you do your many brilliant accents that you've got a huge repertoire to pick from.
Why, thank you.
Do you ever find yourself changing your voice?
I'm sure my voice does change without me realising it, to convey maybe an emotion or a mood or my intention and maybe my confidence as well, And if you think about it, when you're talking to someone else, we read an awful lot into how they're speaking, just as much as what they're saying. I'm sure of it. And so voices then, the topic for our conversation today with our brilliant guest. But before that, shall we get into boring things about me?
Fab idea.
Boring things about me. Boring Things About Me, where we celebrate what really makes up 90% of our lives, finding enjoyment and comfort in the everyday and the ordinary.
Go on, Jez, you kick us off.
So I think I told you that Dennis the dog and I went for one of our reasonably regular walks with my old university friends a couple of weekends back, which usually involves a longish walk, maybe 15 kilometres, and a pub lunch.
Nice.
Did I tell you what I had for lunch?
Was it fish and chips?
Yep. So why is this relevant? So it was pointed out to me by my family that I always have fish and chips. Now, I claim that's not true, but then I started thinking back and, certainly the last 5 times that we've been out for pub lunch, I have had fish and chips.
You like what you like.
They told me that I've got what was described as boring menu moves. So I want to test this with you now.
Okay.
Can you name what you think my go-to lunch order is?
It would be the super nutty whole food salad from M&S. Recently enjoying a yogurt with a little packet of nuts poured over the top and sometimes a protein ball, not forgetting also an occasional slice of cheese with some of our sharing crackers from the office. And if we're not going nutty whole food salad, then it's usually the meatball pasta.
Oh, right. Okay, well, most of that is exactly what I was looking forward to for lunch today. So there we go. Boring things about me. What about you, Amelia?
My boring thing about me is set on a train, which is often a great source of inspiration from this segment of the podcast.
Yeah.
I was getting on at Tiverton Parkway And I did what I know you would do and find out exactly where I needed to be on the platform.
Platform to carriage alignment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Spot on. Was stood there waiting, and then there were 3 ladies in front of me who all had big suitcases. And as the train pulled in, I worked out that we were aiming for the same door. So actually, my calm Sunday, let's take it easy. I let them go ahead. But they did start to clog up the walkway with the train that I couldn't actually get on. And I started to see everybody else, like the rest of the platform was looking really clear. And there was just me still on there.
Oh, no.
And I can see you're getting stressed. Well, exactly.
Just thinking about that.
Because then I said to myself, and no, Amelia, come on, snap out of what I call is a Jez panic. And then eventually stepped onto the train. But the train was absolutely heaving, and there was no space for any of this luggage. And anyway, this is when the penny dropped that I was going to be the 4th person on the table with these 3 ladies who just booted all some people off of that table. Unfortunately, the bag situation hadn't resolved itself, and the solution was this lovely table that I had reserved deliberately, ticking on all the options with the train line, had 3 ginormous bags piled up on the top. So, yeah, that wasn't quite what I had in mind when you think you're going to get a lovely little bit of space. But it turns out this was the train all the way from Penzance down in Cornwall to London. So there must have been lots of weekend travellers heading back for the business. But boring things about me, yet another train edition. So joining us today is Heather Hanson, an award-winning author in the field of global communication, helping companies build innovative, unmuted cultures where every voice is heard and belongs. Heather is the founder of Singapore-based training and consulting firm Global Speech Academy and is on a mission to empower global voices to contribute towards conversations that matter in business, politics, and life. She believes that only through conscious, confident, and connected communication can we achieve our collective potential and solve the world's greatest problems. She has contributed to 3 books and authored 2 of her own, the most recent being the multi-award-winning book Unmuted: How to Show Up, Speak Up, and Inspire Action. Her next book is a comprehensive guide on how to manage accent bias and promote intersectional inclusion at work. Heather is currently pursuing a PhD at Nanyang Technology University, Singapore, where she is researching the impact of accent bias on multinational organisations. Heather, welcome to the Being Human podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with both of you. I can't wait for this discussion, so I'm really happy to be here.
Heather, we're going to begin by asking you some questions to get to know you a bit better, if you don't mind, before diving into the topic of today's conversation. What 3 words would you use to describe yourself as a child?
Oh, that's actually a pretty easy. I think every adult would say the same 3 words. Curious, beyond belief curious. Why? Gregarious. I never stop talking. And I think if you put those 2 things together in one child, you get the 3rd word, which is extremely precocious. I mean that more in the American meaning than the British meaning, which I understand can be seen in this kind of a negative spoiled brat. But the American meaning is more of a child that's just way ahead of their years. I would say and do things that you wouldn't expect a little kid to say and do. So I was a handful, I think, for my poor parents.
As a parent, it forces you to think on your feet. That's not a good enough answer, Dad. Why?
Yeah.
Heather, what's your favourite thing to do on a lazy Sunday afternoon?
Oh, float on a raft in my pool.
Nice.
100% in the sun. And luckily in Singapore, I can do that year round. So I can do that whenever I want. It's perfect.
Yeah, that'd be a bit of a different story here in London in January, for example.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost wetsuit weather for
all the time.
For swimming outdoors now. Heather, if you could swap lives with someone for a week, living or dead, who would it be and why?
I want to go back to July 20th, 1969, and I want to put on the moon boots of Neil Armstrong. I love it. I would love to have been able to experience that. How cool is that? And I was a major space freak when I was little. All I wanted to do was go work for NASA, and Always a dream. Although now I think I'd be too scared to fly to the moon. Like, I'm not planning on spending, 6 figures to fly up in a rocket or anything. I'm not in my future at all.
Is there a pioneer in you, a pioneering spirit, perhaps?
That's probably what led to my very international life. I didn't leave the planet, but I certainly left my environment where I grew up. Yeah. And haven't gone back. So yeah, there must be a bit of that. And an entrepreneur. And yeah, I like doing new things.
Behind you, where you are, there's a big map of the world on the wall as well.
Yeah.
So it suggests a globe-trotting spirit.
Definitely.
What's the most unexpected or surprising thing about you that people wouldn't guess just by looking at you?
I'm actually a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo.
That's so cool.
And I don't think people would jump to that conclusion when they saw me, the mom at pickup.
Should we turn our attention then to the topic for our conversation today? So we're going to be looking at voice and language and communication. Heather, when you think about your own voice, what kind of relationship have you had with it over the years?
That's a really good question. I think it takes a lot of time to grow into your own voice. I mean, I was lucky that I grew up in a home where my voice was valued. So I think I knew the value of my voice from a young age. They let me talk as much as I wanted. They answered all those questions. They supported my voice. So I think I always knew it was valuable. And with time, you kind of get even more understanding of that as you go out into the world and you realize what you can achieve with that voice, what you can do with that voice, how you can change lives with that voice. And so I've definitely grown in confidence, I would say, as I've moved into my career. And even, within my career, it takes a lot of courage to stand out and be visible, to write books, to put your ideas out into the world. You have to trust your voice. And every time I sit down to write, there's still that feeling of, is it good enough? Will people like this? Are they going to understand it? Have I done it well enough? And you have to really trust that your voice is worth it, that you have something to say. So there's definitely been a development there. And I think it will continue to develop, right? You continue to grow in that confidence as you continue moving. And of course, living internationally and speaking other languages has had a lot to do with that as well. It's changed my relationship with my voice because I feel like in different languages, and it also changes how I communicate, how I interact in those confidence levels as well. So there's definitely a trajectory there that I think has happened over the course of my life.
You just sort of alluded to it then, but you've lived across many cultures, in the US and Denmark and Singapore and more. Yeah. How has that experience shaped the way that you speak and the way that you listen to others?
Oh, if I had a wish for the entire English-speaking population of the world that only grew up with English, it would be that we all had the opportunity to live and work and study and fall in love and build relationships in another country, culture, and language. Because I think what you learn in that experience is truly how to listen to others beyond our biases and filters. And you understand the mental load of speaking another language. We are so lucky and so privileged that the business world speaks English, basically. If you want to be successful in global business, you're typically in a large corporation that speaks English. And as English speakers, we forget that the people we're working with may not have English as their first language. And the amount of effort it goes in, they give to communicating with us, it has definitely changed the way I listen to people, the space I give them when they're speaking, the way I don't jump in to finish their sentences or interrupt them. There's a lot there. It completely shifts the way you approach communication when you have actually lived in that context. And I think that's probably the biggest impact that international living has had on me.
And also, I think it's so interesting how with different languages as well, and when you're immersed in different cultures, there are some words that some languages have that just don't translate into the meaning of in what that word is in English. Like I remember a friend from university, she spoke Turkish because her mum's Turkish, and she was saying that there's this word in Turkish that describes this particular emotion, and she was like, I can't. And we were like, yeah, well, so what's the emotion then? She was like, I can't give it to you in English. It doesn't exist. And so then she just said that you just have these differences of where you can connect to it, but also where you can't. And as you say, to be living and working and studying in it, you get completely immersed in that. But Jez, you had some time in France.
I lived in France for a couple of years, and I remember distinctly the feeling of being different. And there were positive and negative experiences of that. The negative is perhaps more understandable in that one of these things is not like the other, in that sense. And so you do stick out. And you're removed as well from a certain extent from all of the kind of the reference points and, growing up speaking a language, all of the things that become subconsciously normal. If you haven't had that experience, there's no way of fast tracking that other than investing time and being in that culture and soaking it all up. But on a more positive side, being different in that sense, if you like that kind of thing, made you interesting and made people curious about you as well. But I remember distinctly the point at which and it's not there now, so please don't ask me to speak it, but the point at which my spoken language, it wasn't obvious that I wasn't French, or it wasn't obvious that I was English. And then the surprise when people learned that I was English, and all of a sudden I became the outsider again. Oh. Heather, what do you think our voice reveals about who we are as human beings?
It reveals a lot. I mean, it says a lot about us. It reveals emotion, right? We can hear in a voice if someone is calm or upset or happy or sad. It reveals that, even if we don't want it to. If we're nervous and the voice shakes or it cracks, or it tells people a lot about us without us necessarily wanting it to. The voice itself. And of course, lots and lots of demographic characteristics. When you hear a voice and don't have the visual, if we were just speaking on the phone, or the listeners right now who are just hearing my voice, they're making all kinds of assumptions, right? They have placed me geographically where I'm from, very likely. They are making guesses as to how old I am based on the voice and the quality of my voice. They've assigned me a gender for sure. They have decided if I sound female or male. They are thinking about what kind of education I must have had. And this is even without the whole bio that, you so nicely gave at the beginning. They would have already been thinking about these things and determining all of these different characteristics and putting me into little boxes just by listening to my voice. And then if they saw a picture of me, it would either reinforce all of those ideas, or they would have this cognitive dissonance of, oh, wait, I thought something totally different. So we can be very, very accurate in those assumptions, but we can also be very wrong at times. So we have to be careful. But our voices do say a lot about us and influence the perceptions of our listeners.
And how quickly do people form those opinions, do you think?
Oh, very, very quickly. We start making these categorizations really, really quickly. We don't have to hear much speech to be able to do that. I mean, think about even AI cloning. They can clone your voice with like 3 seconds of speech. I mean, it is ridiculous.
I was going to ask you about that. How unique is our voice? After we first met, I was setting up, I think it was phone banking. And to do that, they do like this automatic voice recognition thing where you have to say the same sentence.
My password is my voice or something.
Something like that. Yeah, you have to repeat it a few times until it is happy that it's got the measure of you, so to speak. But I was thinking, if that gets you into the bank, that must be fairly secure. And so I wonder, is our voice like our DNA or like a fingerprint? Is it unique? Can it be copied?
Oh, you're going a little bit outside of my expertise on this, but I really have a hard time trusting those kinds of systems because I feel like it's so easy to imitate and copy voice. I mean, look at actors, actresses who can so easily imitate, comedians especially,
Yeah.
Robin Williams, who could do just about every voice on the planet. I and now with AI, it seems very easy to map and imitate sound, voices. I would be very wary about those kinds of systems.
Have we captured enough of Heather's voice?
Yeah, you have more than enough. Yeah. I know. Well, I mean, we have code words in our family because my voice is out there. I recorded my own audiobook. I mean, Unmuted, the audiobook is me reading it. I podcast everywhere. My voice is everywhere. So it would be incredibly easy to call my daughters and say, "Mommy's in trouble," and send me your credit card number, whatever.
Yeah.
It would be so easy. So we've actually implemented code words and have specific questions to ask in those situations to avoid scams like that. And it's very real. It's happening. So I think that's something to be careful
to be mindful of. Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I think, Jez, you might want to call the bank and have another form of security because your voice is also out there now.
My voice is out there, and the answers I give, as you know, are incredibly predictable as well. What would you like for lunch? Fish and chips.
Heather, how do our accents shape our sense of identity and belonging?
That's a really interesting question. Because as you said, until you leave where you grow up, you probably don't even realize you have an accent. I mean, me growing up in California, I certainly didn't think I had an accent. And if I did meet someone who sounded different from me, I assumed they had the accent, not me. Because I sound just like the newscasters and the Hollywood stars. And, I speak just as you speak, the prestige variety of British English from the southern part of the UK. I speak the prestige variety of American English. So all the communication around me sounded like me. So of course, if I went to, the East Coast and I hear a New Yorker, they have the accent, not me. If I hear someone from the South, they definitely have the accent, not me. So we grow up assuming that we don't have the accents when we are born into a privileged accent. People, however, from the South of America or the Northeast, New England, and of course, the North of the UK. I mean, you have 40 different dialects in the UK, and all of them mean something. They have an identity. And when you grow up with one of the non-prestige accents, you certainly know from a very young age that you have an accent and that it is different and that it is not as good as the prestige accent. And we have linguistic studies that have shown this. In America, kids as young as 9 were able to say that the Northerners were smarter, but the Southerners were more friendly. And so they knew that they didn't sound as smart as people with my accent, for example. So they already knew that stereotype. Then in Canada, a group of researchers wanted to prove that the Canadian kids weren't as biased as the Americans because they had grown up with more languages around them. If you go to Toronto, it's one of the most multilingual cities in the world. So they were trying to see if kids there didn't have this bias, that were more open. Sadly, the 5-year-olds in their study, they were given recordings and asked to choose their favorite teacher. Which voice do you want? Which teacher do you want? And they identified the teacher who spoke the prestige variety of English for that area. And not only did they want that person as a teacher, they believed they would be the best teacher, that they were the smartest, the best teacher. So we already have these stereotypes ingrained in us from a very, very young age. And on the flip side, I would have also known at age 5 or 9 that the Southerners weren't quite as smart as us, because I had watched cartoons where all of the dumb characters had Southern accents and where, the New Yorkers were gangsters. And so I had already learned all this. I learned it from Disney, right? Mm-hmm. That the hero sounds like me. The hero is American, general American English. The bad guy is what? They're always British. The villains are always British in the Disney movies. So we know from a very, very young age, you're the bad guys.
Yeah.
And we learn that. We learn that very, very early. So then we end up building this identity around that without even knowing we're doing it. We have no conscious understanding of this, which is why I love talking about this. Because the minute I talk about it, everyone goes, "Oh, I never thought about that. Oh my gosh, you're right." Because we've never consciously considered it.
Yeah, I do think that over recent years, there's more. I'm thinking about sort of here in the UK, if you think about who are now the newscasters around there has been a significant shift in the voices that are represented on radio, on TV. It might not be 100% perfect and representative of absolutely everyone, but in terms of different voices from all across England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland being involved, there definitely has, I think there seems to be more effort to try and not create these stereotypes and prestige around certain accents. But it's really interesting what you're saying is that this has all started from so young. So you grow up with these things around you. So your sort of perceptions of others become completely unconscious, and you might be behaving in ways without even, having your eyes open to it.
I've got no evidence or data to back this up, but I wonder whether that's changing with the kind of globalization of media and, as you say, efforts made to ensure that voices are perhaps more representative, particularly in kind of broadcast media, certainly here in the UK, whether youngsters are hearing a broader range of voices in their early years. Because it's those early years that really hardwire the relationship perhaps with someone's voice and what that means. And actually, interestingly now, I think if you hear someone with a really strong kind of received pronunciation on the BBC, they almost stick out.
Yeah.
But I imagine that there is still an awful lot to do to ensure that we do as much as we possibly can to ensure that those biases are either not baked in and hardwired in, or that they're challenged regularly as well. Through conversations like this that remind us that actually, it's what someone's saying and how they make you feel, and what the intent of their inquiry is, and the questions that they're asking and of you that matters, and not how they sound. It's with everything, though, isn't it? We use these little heuristics, these rules of thumbs to judge. I'm guessing, is this person safe or not? Am I safe fundamentally in the company of this individual?
But Jez, you landed on a good point there, because that is actually where it starts, right? When we're in the womb, we can already hear the patterns of the language of our mother when she speaks. We can hear the intonation, we can hear the patterns. And when we're born, we already know what is our language and what safe people around us sound like, our caretakers, whoever is caring for us. We associate and we can hear that language. So, for example, when I first went to Denmark and I met my baby niece, who was under a year old at the time, anytime I picked her up and, oh, you're so cute, oh, look at you, da da da, screams, screaming. She hated me. And why? I wasn't safe. I did not sound like anyone that had been in her sphere, right? And so we have that instinctual, ability to know safe or not, right? And that's that primal influence that we have to keep ourselves safe. And we've used language in that way from tribal days, caveman days, all the way through. We recognize us versus them, and we draw those lines based on just that little snippet of speech. And it does come back to that idea of safety. So we have to remember that, in the modern day and age, different does not equal danger.
No.
we're okay. They sound different. You are not in danger. But it is sparking that instinct in us. So that's part of the problem. Before the culture even adds to it, we do have this primal need for safety that we're reacting to in these situations as well.
Heather, what surprised you most in your research on accent bias and the way that plays out in global organizations?
Yeah, well, the PhD is in its early phases, but just from, the general literature and studies that I've been doing and my own experience in Singapore, such an incredibly multilingual, multicultural, multinational environment, it's probably the most shocking result that I see. And honestly, I've built a whole business on this, is the fact that people are held back at the highest levels of organizations based on how they sound. And I find that absolutely shocking, that I get a call from HR, and these are multiple clients I'm talking about here, where it's the same story every time. We want to move him in the C-suite. I had one who was the acting CFO. They wanted to make him permanent, but he was going to have to pass this test first to change the way he spoke so that he fit the idea of how they wanted him to represent the company. So they'll use words like, he needs to just sound a bit more global. I say he because most of my clients still to this day are primarily he at this level, unfortunately. But it will be, we don't think he's global enough. We don't think that he can represent the company at the standard that we would like. Or, he has to do these quarterly financial reports and the media doesn't understand him. And so he needs to change. And it just shocks me that they can take a candidate who has been with the company over 20 years, who they know is the right person for the job, and not promote them based on these stereotypes. And that I find incredibly shocking. And so we do see a hierarchy even in the organizations where the language and accent abilities, if you can't even say that because there isn't a goal accent that we're looking for, we shouldn't be, but that hierarchy mirrors these prestige varieties of, you have to be up here with the general American or an RP or Southern UK dialect up here. And then it goes down the other regional varieties from top to bottom to the lowest level regional variety. Then we have ethnic varieties under that. Then we have the foreign speakers who are always at the lowest level. And then we'll also see an overlap of other intersections like race, for example. So my English accent on my Danish is very acceptable and considered charming. I've been called that when I speak Danish in the middle of a business meeting, no less. But someone from the Middle East or from Africa, their accent on their Danish is in no way considered charming. So even my foreign accent will be seen as more acceptable than someone of a different race. So we see all of the privilege overlapping with race, with gender. I mean, being male versus female, big difference. Neurodiversity is in there. Sexuality is even in there. With comments like, why do you sound so gay? How is that even acceptable to say out loud? And that's why also we see that this is probably the most obvious remaining form of discrimination because we talk about it so openly. We say so easily, you're really hard to understand. Your accent's really heavy. I think you need to work on that. We would never go and say, I think your skin's a little too dark. I think that you should do something about that. Yet it's okay for us to talk about their speech, something that they can't necessarily change. So that's forever shocking me in the workplace that we see these hierarchies mirroring the global hierarchies of language.
It must be really confronting and takes my breath away hearing you describe people's experiences in that way. So let's imagine the individual that's being sort of put forward for the CFO position. Is it the way they speak, or is it because they maybe don't feel like they speak like other people, therefore they lack confidence, and therefore how their presence and gravitas changes as a result? So if you had somebody that had a regional accent but that was supremely confident, could command a room, does the accent then become less important or not? I mean, I hope it does, but I have a horrible suspicion you're going to say no.
Well, we don't actually have the evidence around this. This is something I would like to dig into a bit in my PhD because we don't really have evidence to support it. But from the experience that I see, and when I talk to high-level leaders who have a non-prestige accent and are CEOs, they're running the company. If I ask them, what did you do differently? Or what about your accent? Do you ever feel like it held you back? Their response is normally, I've never even thought about my accent. So I think you're onto something there in the sense of, is it because we think our accent is a problem that it becomes a problem? Because we lose confidence and then we don't perform at the same level. I mean, the people who are sent to me, they could have been very confident before they came to me, but being sent to me then knocks their confidence because that's when they first hear that, oh, wait, what are you talking? What, you don't like the way I talk? Like, what's wrong? How do I change it? But I would say more than anything, because these are the hardest clients for me. I'm just walking this line of hypocrisy where I'm saying, I want you to stay as you. I don't want you to change. I want you to express yourself, and this is your identity. Yet at the same time, you're not going to get a promotion unless we help you somehow. So we have to somehow meet this expectation of the audience, who is the boss, the HR, the board, and make these small changes. But in all honesty, there's very little you can do to change an accent, especially in this 50 plus age bracket. It is going to be incredibly difficult. There's no one at that level of business who has the time, energy, dedication to focus on changing a vowel. I mean, it's a ridiculous request. And so what ends up happening is usually a much larger shift in confidence than a shift in the actual language. So I do agree that there is something here about confidence. And so what ends up happening through when I'm working with them is their awareness in what are the sounds I'm using that are triggering this reaction from these people? What are the words that are difficult for me to say in a way that makes them happy? What new words could I use instead? When I notice someone doesn't understand, I now know why, because it could be this, or this. Maybe the consonant sounds, maybe I use the wrong intonation, maybe I use the wrong stress. And I'm able to work around these situations a lot easier than in the past.
Yeah.
And so that level of confidence that grows is usually the biggest shift I see, more than changes in sound. And that is usually enough to then get them that promotion, even though they don't sound really that different.
And we see it with the work that we do. You know, we work a lot with leaders, either existing leaders or people that are working hard towards becoming leaders of both themselves and teams and organizations. And one of the things that is consistent across all of them, regardless of gender, ethnicity, sexuality, is a level of sort of self-awareness and ability to tune into what they naturally do well, to play to their strengths. And if you're able to do that, if you have the self-awareness and the confidence to do that, others tend to follow you, regardless of what you look like or sound like. I would hope. I certainly the people that if I think of the people that over the years that I have been naturally drawn to and inspired by, it's because they're passionate about what they do and they're really good at it. And those two things mixed together are powerful. They're quite intoxicating. Because that translates often into kind of enthusiasm, which I find infectious in other people.
Heather, your TEDx talk challenges the idea of good English and bad English. Why do those myths persist and what do they cost us?
We almost need to go back in history first to understand that globally, the English language has been used as power, right? I mean, from the colonial days, we exported the English language, and that was almost used as a weapon to control populations. If you didn't learn English, you couldn't be part of this high-level club. You couldn't have any say in anything. So already there, we had a lot of gatekeeping happening, because once they start learning English, oh, well, that's very good. You've learned English, but you actually don't speak it well enough, or your accent's too heavy, or we still have ways to keep them from entering the higher level, powerful society. And this is just simply translated and continued on in a multi-billion-dollar English as a foreign language industry globally, where we continue to reinforce through testing to actually move to the UK. You need to pass, study in the UK. You have to pass certain exams to show that you speak properly, that you speak at an appropriate level. And we use this really as a gatekeeping tool to keep people in their places. And even when they do speak at an appropriate level or can write and read and speak, then it's the accent that becomes the problem. So these myths persist because we're forced to take all of these exams. We continue to promote people based on their level of eloquence instead of their leadership capabilities. We have all of these issues that are happening that continue to teach us that speaking a certain way will give you more power. And we see it reflected in our media, in our cartoons, in all the cultural things around us, those influences around us. And we continue to have that messaging. So that myth will continue to persist, that there is a good and a bad. instead of just acknowledging that there are differences. I mean, the English spoken in Singapore is different from the UK or the US or India or Philippines. It is not better. It is not worse. It is different. But that's very, very hard for those of us who speak the good English to accept or acknowledge, because that means we're giving away something that has given us power. And so it's the same story with all these areas of diversity. It's just still so unseen what's really happening on this global level. But I mean, imagine only 25% of the world even speaks English, and only 25% of that 25% grows up speaking English. I mean, we are such a teeny tiny minority of the world, and yet we are the ones who are immediately privileged in global business and economics and rule the world through this language. And we have that benefit of being the most confident, being the most charismatic, because we aren't thinking in the background, oh, how do I translate this? And what's the word I'm looking for? And is that grammar correct? And am I living up to the standard, right, of proper English?
And what can we do as individuals to make a difference, do you think?
Yeah, at this stage, it's really about just the awareness. I mean, anyone even just listening to this conversation, I mean, that's already doing something. But it's also about checking your own biases, really thinking about what were the influences in my life? What are the experiences I've had that could have led to me either thinking someone is less competent or less trustworthy because of the way they speak? It could be as simple as, I had my first computer at university, and we're talking like the late 90s, right? And if I had to call a call center, Microsoft, to fix my computer, and I'm upset, I'm trying to turn in a paper, I'm under deadline, and my computer's not working, and I'm angry. And then who do I get? I get an Indian call center worker named John, who's trying to communicate with me, and I'm frustrated, and I can't understand him, and no fault of his own, but I can't understand him, and I'm angry. And then that emotion sits in me. What happens 10 years later when John in India is my tech colleague who is managing our whole IT network in our global company, or, my boss or my team members come from India? Does that emotion come back up? Do I give them the same respect? Because in that moment when I was young, I wasn't respecting that person. It was very much a power differential of, listen, I can't understand you. You're not helping me. I'm upset. So even these emotions sit in you. You have to be aware then that that's going to follow you through life, along with all those Disney characters you watch, cartoons, all these social identifying factors that you've been taught. You have to really sit and reflect on those to then in the moment be able to say, I know where this is coming from. I'm going to ignore that. This person is as educated, if not more than me. It doesn't matter how they speak. It doesn't matter how they sound. I need to listen and give respect in the same way, or else I'm going to completely overlook their brilliant ideas. And that's what we see happening in the workplace. Their ideas are being overlooked, or someone else picks up the idea, says it in an accent we approve of, and suddenly it's a brilliant idea. And this is happening all the time.
What advice do you have for someone who feels that their voice isn't valued or heard at work? What practical steps can those individuals take to make a difference there?
I would say, and this is true also in other areas of diversity and inclusion, finding an ally is a huge, huge benefit. So finding someone who's in that meeting with you normally and making sure that your voice is heard. So when you're talking and someone cuts you off, that ally can step in and say, excuse me, sorry, can we hear what she was just saying? Can we hear the rest of this person's speech before we interrupt? That ally can have a really powerful role. The ally could also be inviting you into the conversation. I mean, I know that in Danish, if I'm in a meeting, I'm going to be much slower to jump in, much slower to participate. It's not that I don't have a million thoughts. I still have as many thoughts as I do in English. They're all there, but it's harder for me to jump in because I'm thinking, how do I want to say this? What words am I going to use? How are they going to understand it? But if I had someone just slow down the conversation and say, Heather, what are you thinking? It looks like you want to say something. Like, what are you thinking right now? I'm sure you've got an opinion on this. That would be all the invitation I needed to then speak up. And I would be able to say, yeah, you're right. I do have something to say. And then I would be put into the position to say it and have my voice heard. So finding an ally who is there specifically to ensure that your voice is part of the conversation is incredibly powerful. But more than that, what you can do just on your own is to just keep talking. Keep talking. One of the biggest complaints people have is, oh, this person's just so hard to understand. So what happens? They're embarrassed because they can't understand the person. The person speaking is embarrassed because they're worried they don't speak clearly. And what do? They avoid each other because they're both embarrassed. And every conversation is a challenge. This is the worst thing you can do, because the only way that it gets easier is by having more contact, tuning your ear, listening more. You have to have more interaction and work through that discomfort until finally it gets easier and easier and easier.
That's really good advice, isn't it? It reminds me a little bit of something along the lines of, I didn't like that person very much. I must get to know them better.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I'm sort of mindful as well that when we talk about voice, we in the West, we are very fortunate to have the ability to, we have a voice, we can express ourselves, and we have the right to express our opinions freely. And there are many, many people in the world that don't have a voice, full stop. And if they do, aren't allowed to express themselves freely. So that's...
Yeah, and we often forget about that element, that the environment has such an impact on how we speak up and participate. So we're always so focused on the speaker, right? And how does the speaker need to speak so that people will listen? And we never think about how should people be listening so that the speaker wants to speak up, that they feel that they can speak up, that they know that they'll be listened to. And so that environment element is incredibly important, both, in this micro team level, community level, but also, as you're bringing up, this more national level of what rights do we actually have to be heard, and how are we being silenced in that sense, from a governmental regulation sense.
What can leaders do within organizations, do you think, to unmute cultures in that sense?
It is a big part of this environment. So what I write about in Unmuted is really looking at communication much more holistically, because as a corporate trainer, speaker, for all these years, I get a call, end of the year, right now is the time. They're all calling me like, Heather, we really want to change our communication next year. Can you come in and do a 2-day course on presentation skills? It's like, that's not going to do it, right? We're always focused on the speaker and their confidence level. So the Unmuted framework is saying, yes, confidence is part of it. If you think of it as a Venn diagram, we have confident communication, but we also have conscious communication, the self-awareness, the cultural intelligence, the listening skills. And then we also have connected communication, which is referring to the environment. Do people feel that they belong? Do people feel that they can speak up, that they will be listened to? And that environment that we build in the leadership, and this is a top-down. We can do things at every level. I mean, we say all these things like, you can be a leader at every level and you can influence them, blah, blah, blah. But this culture piece must happen from the top down. You cannot bring me in and say, Heather, we want an unmuted culture. And yet the leadership is not on board. And the minute people start speaking up and voicing their opinions, the leadership shoots them down.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So when companies are really serious about implementing this unmuted culture in their workplace, it absolutely starts at the top. Because otherwise we cannot create the safe environment for people to feel like they can participate the way that they want to.
Final question for you. What does being human mean to you through the lens of voice and communication?
To be human is to communicate. That's the foundation of everything. It may not be in language. It may just be emotion, but it's communicating. It's connecting with other humans. And however you express yourself through voice, through sound, through language, through art, through writing, these are all forms of communication. And I think that's really what defines us as humans, that we do this, right? That we form our connections through communicating. You can't get around it. If you're human, you need to communicate and express yourself and your ideas in some way, shape, or form.
Heather, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on the Being Human podcast today. I've found it extremely thought-provoking.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to have an opportunity to share these ideas, and I hope it's also given the listeners something to think about.
I found that a really powerful conversation and quite confronting. I was struck by how unaware I am day to day of voice and accent bias. I like to think of myself as someone who is reasonably aware of many of my biases. We all have them, and there's nothing you can do about them other than be aware of them and know when they're coming into play. And so I do work quite hard to consciously offset those biases in how I relate to and connect with others. But how I react to how people sound is not something I've spent as much time thinking about, which means I've got work to do. And linked to this is the point that Heather was making about the way stereotypes still persist in the media. Again, I like to think I have a broad range of sources for news, for reading, for music and art and so on. But I now think I'll be more curious about the various voices I listen to and explore the thoughts that arise as I do so. And that can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What about you, Amelia?
I think that there are two main things that I took away from the conversation with Heather. And firstly, when we asked Heather to sort of describe what our voice reveals about ourselves, one of the things that really hit home for me was how much emotion is in our voices. And you can say the same thing with 3 different emotions and people will be able to read how you're feeling in the way that you say it. And I think that this perhaps comes across slightly more strongly with negative emotions than it does positive ones. I'm making an assumption, but I think I can definitely be guilty of letting the way that I'm feeling interfere with a conversation that I'm having. And that, could impact the way that I hear what other people are saying when you're in that emotional state as well. So I think that's something for me to just have a think about and try and be more present of or more aware of the way that you're feeling and how that interferes with the way that you converse with other people. And secondly, I think that the role that we all have as allies to aid conversations and reduce the sort of accent bias play out in different environments is really important. And being allies to those people who have different accents or where English isn't their first language in settings that we commonly find ourselves in, and that for those people who might be penalised, we've got a role to stand up for them and invite them to speak and contribute to conversations when perhaps certain environments or situations don't lend them to do that. So yeah, trying to create that space where people feel safe to contribute is something I'm definitely going to be more aware of and active in trying to do.
Thank you so much for listening to the Being Human podcast. Do hit the follow button and leave us a review on whichever platform you're using.
As always, we would love to hear from you. So if you've got suggestions on a topic you would like to explore, or if you think you'd make a brilliant guest, or if you would like to talk to us and our colleagues around the world about the work we do as Just Add Water, we would all love to hear from you.
So please do get in touch and stick around for arguably one of the best bits of the podcast. The bloopers reel is coming up after this.
You've been listening to the Being Human podcast. Brought to you by Just Add Water. Nurturing individual brilliance, forging collective strength.
Boring things about me. The part of the podcast is quite hard to say.
The part of the podcast,
Yeah.
Bring Back My Pig.
Yeah,
I know we're really over
no
analysing
one wants-
everything that we say.
No one wants to say anything, except me, of course.
Her next book is a comprehensive guide on how to manage accent bias and promote intersectional... Jez, this is your fault.
No, have one more go at it, please.
No.
Please. I think I've grown over the course of this episode. Old Jez would have done that.
I'll let you know how you're getting on.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there.